Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also at 21stCenturyWire.com. Thank you so much for joining us this Sunday for this weekly omnibus news and analysis radio program. Again, brought to you here on ACR. This is episode 523 of the Sunday Wire. We've got a very special segment for you today. We're going to be joined by an author and a journalist who is reporting on the ground right now in Lebanon from Beirut. Many of you know him, you know his work. He is very visible on social media, and his blog site, craigmurray.org, is a go-to place. It's where you want to be right now. I want to bring him up onto the stage to talk about what he is doing and his experience so far. Let's bring him up right now. Craig Murray, welcome to the program. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Patrick. It's good to see you again, too.
So, Craig, tell us about your experience. I've been following your blog and your Twitter feed, obviously, X feed. Sorry, I'm still using the old brand. And it's been quite a drama, what you've been through just to kind of get yourself up and running there, plus everything that's going on. And there's bombs dropping on Beirut, which itself is a pretty incredible situation. But go ahead, Craig. Tell us how it's been for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I will do. Probably noise cancellation is taking it out, but the noise of drones here this morning is really intense and constant. And then it's being joined by F-35s going over from time to time as well. And we're hearing bombs dropping in the distance, and occasionally they're big enough that the place shakes. So you may get some of that. But as I say, noise cancellation is probably taking most of it out. When we arrived in Beirut, we were very anxious to get up and running and going. But there's a tremendous government bureaucracy to get through in order to be allowed to report from here. And one of the ironies of that is that you're not allowed to report unless you are accredited with the Ministry of Information. It's an offence to report without accreditation, an offence which is taken seriously. But they will only accredit legacy media. They will not. They specifically exclude online media. So it has to be a broadcast television channel, and again, not a production company. It has to be a channel or a newspaper. So when we arrived, for example, we brought credentials from Consortium News, and they were refused because Consortium News is online. Whereas the Wall Street Journal, which is a Murdoch-owned Zionist publication, were accrediting at the same time, and they were given VIP treatment. So there's a tremendous bias in the little Western reporting you get from here because people like you and I are excluded. We managed eventually to get accreditation from an Italian mainstream television company, BioBlue, which started as an alternative channel and then got so successful it moved onto television, digital, and satellite broadcast. So they've kindly given us accreditation, and we're now producing reports for BioBlue in addition to all the other stuff we're doing. But as I don't speak any Italian, whether they have any idea what I'm saying, I don't know. But that's been the answer to that. But as you know, as part of this process, we were continually being arrested and detained for not having the correct permits while trying to report. And we were detained twice by General Security for a whole day each time, and that was quite a scary thing. Handcuffed at some stages. And we were also detained by Hezbollah, which again was quite scary because there was nobody available at all. And we went through several levels of Hezbollah who spoke any English or French, so we couldn't explain ourselves to them. And obviously people are extremely jumpy, and I understand that, and that's perfectly understandable. And there was one spy who was caught. He was a guy with a UK passport who was also an Israeli, who had an Israeli passport. He hid his Israeli passport. He didn't declare it on entering. In fact, he declared he'd never been to Israel. He lied. And he was pretending to be a journalist. And he was actually detected and arrested. And extraordinarily, because of the extreme influence here of the Americans in particular, rather than being imprisoned as a spy, he was merely deported back to the United Kingdom. But that experience, among others, has made them very, very wary of people coming here as journalists and taking photos on the ground, and potentially, of course, giving targets to the Israelis. That's why it's such a difficult process. But it has been a hard time. We now have 4 different permits at the moment, and we're looking to get a 5th one in order to be able to move freely around and report. So it's been a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare, and it's been extremely frustrating because we've not been in a position where we're allowed to travel to, for example, to Baalbek. We're not allowed to travel to the south and actually report on the zones where the major Israeli attacks have been. But having said that, the attacks are coming to us. Israel is attacking all over Beirut today, including in Christian areas. So we are expecting to get our permits to travel tomorrow. I think that is going to happen. But as I say, the war is coming to us anyway, and the bombing here today is intense, and it's also in Christian areas today.
And Craig, I'm going to put a tweet up on screen that you had a couple of hours ago. I think it was last night. You said there has been a major escalation in the scale of intensity of Israel's terror attacks on Lebanon today. Being here amongst the lovely people on receiving end, it's simply astonishing that Biden, Starmer, Schultz, etc., all support this. The world has not gone mad, but evil. Craig, how can you put this into words? Beirut had spent decades recovering from a horrible, protracted civil war. The country is just getting back on its feet. Now, then going through an economic crisis, a collapse a couple of years ago, then getting back on its feet again, and now this. Just give us your impressions just from the people that you've been interacting with, and just to the general feeling from the Lebanese population.
I think the most important single word here is resilience. The resilience of the Lebanese people and the way Beirut comes up again after disaster after disaster. And what you said was right. They had the Israeli occupation. They had the civil war. They had another Israeli occupation. They had the fight against that. They had a massive economic collapse. And of course, they had one of the biggest explosions in the history of the world when the fertilizer store went up. And the ability to recover from that and the strength of the people is extraordinary. There's one thing I want to get over very strongly to people, because it is not understood in the West. We're living here in the heart of one of the Christian areas, and where we've been here now for 3 weeks, more or less, and we are meeting and socializing with and working with people every day from all communities, but primarily from the Christian community. And it is absolutely wrong. It is 100% mistaken to think that it is only the Shia community in Lebanon which opposes the Israelis. The vast majority, the very large majority of the Christian community here in Lebanon are viscerally opposed to the Israelis and their frequent historic attacks on Lebanon, and are as outraged as people everywhere else in the world by the attacks on Gaza, by the genocide going on in Palestine. And I've seen so much reporting in the West that gives the notion that the Christian community here support Israel, and that the Christian community here wish to see Israel destroy Hezbollah. And that's just simply untrue. That absolutely is untrue. There is a small minority, and I've met members of that small minority. There's a small minority of people with their historic links to the fascist phalangist movement and to Lebanon force. There's a small minority who think like that, but they really are a small minority. And the major Christian parties, which are part of a coalition government with Hezbollah, don't think that. And certainly young people here don't think that at all. But as everywhere else in the world, the young people here are almost 100% opposed to Israel and the genocide. And that goes across Christian, Shia, and Sunni communities, including many of the different diasporas you have here. You have so many refugee communities in Lebanon over the years. You have Syrian refugees, who are probably the most recent wave. You have Palestinian refugees. You have Armenian refugees going back essentially, but a big community here. And there's the divide and rule attempts really aren't working. And these Israeli attacks, and as they are moving more into Christian areas attacking today, are an attempt to split off the communities and to restart the civil war. I think there should be no doubt about that. The Israeli plan, backed basically by the United States, is to try to restart the civil war and destroy the Shias. That's essentially the plan here. It's not going to work. What they're doing is having the opposite effect. They are forging an ever stronger Lebanese identity across all communities.
I think that's really important, Craig, because how this is being framed, it's almost like, Craig, that the Western media, the corporate mainstream machine, and politicians are using the same tactic which they use to frame the Israel's pulverizing of Gaza, basically saying it's Israel versus Hamas. And here in Lebanon, they're saying it's Israel versus Hezbollah and not the Lebanese people. But in both cases, this is clearly an attack on a population, Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, but especially in Gaza, and then in Lebanon generally. So this isn't just, but it's being framed as, oh, these are surgical attacks against Hezbollah terrorist targets that are threatening Israel. How would you unpack that conundrum?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the extraordinary thing is, they maintain this propaganda in the face of overwhelming evidence that it's not true. You can see that there is, even more so than in Gaza, because Gaza obviously it's very difficult for even citizen journalists to operate there, and so many citizen journalists and journalists of all kinds have been deliberately killed by the Israelis in Gaza. Here in Lebanon, there's still many Lebanese journalists on the ground. We're here now. We hope to be documenting shortly. Russia Today are here. There are a few outlets here. Al Jazeera are here, of course. And you can see that what are being destroyed are blocks of flats, blocks of apartments. That they are not military installations at all. They don't contain any military installations. The pretty well 100% of in Beirut, 100% of Israeli targeting is on blocks of residential apartments in which ordinary people live. That they are simply taking out the civilian infrastructure. And something else I want absolutely to highlight, because this is very important, is that, again, as in Gaza, they are deliberately destroying medical personnel. They've destroyed one hospital so far in Dahia. They've caused the evacuation of other hospitals. They've attacked several health centers, but they've killed over 220 medics and paramedics. And they've taken out 6 or 7 at least ambulances while those ambulances were working. And this deliberate targeting and destruction of medical facilities and of medical staff is something absolutely astonishing. But we've seen in Gaza that we are seeing here, and there's no reporting on it. And I've got one other point about the way this is reported, the way this is framed in Western media, which is, where the hell are the Western media? As I said, the Wall Street Journal flew in for a couple of days. The BBC and CNN, maybe they have an excuse not to be in Gaza because the Israelis will not let them in. They've got no excuse not to be here. There's nothing stopping them coming here and filming what is happening, but they're simply not here. And we're already at the stage where 3,500 people have been killed, 3,500 dead people, more than 10,000 injured people. And the intensity of that has really gone up. I mean, today, it's constant here in Beirut. I think we will find that they're killing people now in the hundreds a day once we start to get death tolls coming in. And the Western media are almost pretending it's not happening, or reporting it, as you say, as isolated attacks on Hezbollah facilities, whereas in fact there were 19 waves of attack on Beirut yesterday, all of them on residential areas. That's what's actually happening.
I mean, you're now getting the real firsthand experience, Craig, of being in a country and a major metropolis that does not have control of its own airspace, which is kind of an extraordinary thing. But a lot of people ask themselves, Craig, why is that? How come Lebanon cannot have their own air defense systems to protect their own population against the very thing which you yourself are experiencing right now? How is this situation allowed to stand?
Extraordinary, isn't it? And it comes down to United States control. America is building the second largest embassy complex in the world here in Lebanon. And you may legitimately ask yourself, Lebanon's a country of under 5 million people. And although there are people of fascinating commercial skills and it operates a key position, it's probably not in the list of the top 100 wealthiest countries in the world. So why does the Americans' second biggest embassy have to be in a tiny country? And the answer is, of course, that the Americans are running the country. They've been banning aid coming in from Iraq, from the airport here. They've been banning people from they've banned injured people from being flown out to Iraq for medical treatment from the airport here. And an American envoy is coming here on Tuesday or Wednesday, probably Wednesday, to try to enforce a ceasefire deal under which, as you say, not only are the Lebanese not allowed to have any air defense systems, under this ceasefire deal, which they claim is based on Security Council Resolution 1701, but is in fact the abnegation of it. Under this ceasefire deal, Lebanon would surrender its sovereignty and Israel would be allowed to enter southern Lebanon anytime it wishes, and Israel would have completely free roam over Lebanon's airspace. And that's what the Americans are trying to enforce at the moment. And they're trying to get the Lebanese to sign this humiliating surrender document by pounding Beirut with American bombs. The F-35s flying overhead are American aircraft. The bombs killing, as we speak. There are children under the rubble here in Beirut. There are children dying, suffocating, crushed, trapped under rubble here in Beirut as I'm talking to you. And that's done by the Americans with American bombs. And then they have the cheek to come here and say, oh, we're trying to negotiate a ceasefire. Whereas in fact, they've controlled and humiliated this country for far too long. They really have. We have the ludicrous situation where this nation is being bombed and invaded, and the Lebanese army is neutral. What does that happen? How does that happen? How has it ever happened? Has it ever happened in the history of the world that a country has been invaded and the army of that country is neutral? I'm hoping that that we are going to see radical change across the Middle East. We have seen, everyone now realizes that Israel has lost its legitimacy. It's lost its legitimacy in the eyes of the people of the world. And it's even lost its legitimacy in the eyes of the majority of the people in countries where the paid politicians still support Israel. But across the West, it's not. In the South and in the East, Israel has no legitimacy whatsoever. Across the West with the people, Israel has no legitimacy everywhere except perhaps for Germany, because the Germans are suffocated by guilt. Everywhere except Germany, the people of the world have had enough of Israel, and that's going to have a long-term effect, I have no doubt, in bringing Israel to a halt. It will have to end. Just exactly as with apartheid South Africa, where for perhaps a decade, the politicians of the United States and the United Kingdom managed to maintain apartheid South Africa after their own people had categorically rejected it. But eventually that wasn't any longer sustainable. We're going to see, over a period of years, we're going to see the end of Israel because it's now rejected by the people of the world. And I'm hoping that the ludicrousness of Lebanon's lack of effective sovereignty and the failure here to have proper active central government, active on the international stage, in control of its own airspace, in control of its own territory. I'm hoping that will end. I'm hoping we will see a Lebanese resurgence as a result of this. And just as Israel will disappear, American hegemony over Lebanon will disappear, and hopefully that massive billion-dollar embassy complex will become redundant.
And just to be clear, Craig, so I and we don't fall foul of the ever elastic hate speech laws. When you say the end of Israel, you're talking about the regime, the apartheid regime. And what you're saying is that as we saw an end to the apartheid regime in South Africa, so we will see eventually an end to this apartheid brutal regime that is in control of this area of occupied Palestine. Is that more or less? I just want to clarify that because this get clipped and put on an ADL website. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, we will anyway. But yeah, that's absolutely right. And as I think you know, when I started my diplomatic career back in a long time ago in 1984, my first job in the Foreign Office, in the British Foreign Office, was as desk officer for South Africa. And at that time, at the height of apartheid, if you spoke to white South Africans, most of them would tell you, we can't have majority rule. If we have majority rule, we will all be massacred and killed. The black people will kill us all. And most of the white people who said that actually believed it. They really believed that would happen. Whereas, of course, if you spoke to black South Africans, they had no intention of killing white people whatsoever. And it's exactly the same with Israel now, exactly the same thing. They say, if you demolish the apartheid state of Israel, all the Jewish people will be killed and massacred. And people saying that do actually believe it. They are that deluded, just as white South Africans were that deluded. They're so blinded by their own hatred and racial prejudice that they don't seem able to realize that not everybody has the same hatred and racial prejudice towards them. And so the Israeli people, I think, really do believe, just as the white South Africans believe, that they will all be killed if Israel is abolished, whereas in fact, they won't. Hardly any white South Africans were killed as a result of the abolition of apartheid. There were a few isolated farmers who were killed, and you could argue possibly that was a result of the abolition of apartheid, part of that process, but far fewer, of course, than black people have been being killed under apartheid. But there's, I can't pretend that it would involve no violence whatsoever. But the vast majority of Jewish people, just like white South Africans, would be welcome to stay in a liberated Palestine. And I don't know a single Palestinian who wants to kill the Jewish people. I know many, many Palestinians. And I genuinely do not know one who even contemplates for a moment a massacre of Jewish people.
And that's an important point, Craig, because that's the immediate reaction you get when we have this debate, when they're talking about a two-state solution or a one-state solution. I think what you're talking about here, correct me if I'm wrong, is that one state where everybody has equal rights under the law and there's no apartheid or discrimination, and it's not segregated the way that Israel is segregated with a military occupation on top of that, subjugating millions of people in occupied Palestine. So you're kind of, it seems to me like you're articulating what would be called a normal state in the international system. But if you want to go ahead on clarify that.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, there is no two-state solution. We have to stop pretending that the remains of Gaza and the little scattered bits of the West Bank, which are not occupied by illegal settlements or cut off by walls and roads and armor, could be a viable state. When I just gave over a bit of Jerusalem, of course they couldn't. It's a few isolated pockets of land where, and even advocates of the two-state solution even argue that in these little isolated and cut off pockets of land, Palestinians would not be allowed any weapons or anything to defend themselves with, and they would basically be, and water resources are stolen by Israel. They would basically just be a pool of captive labor, able under controlled circumstances to enter Israel to service its factories and waste disposal and those things. Which was exactly the model of South Africa, where they tried to set up what they called so-called independent Bantustans, which were to house the black population and allow them in on a daily basis to provide labor. So that's not a solution. And even the people who say they support it don't actually really support it, because they supported it, they would recognize this state of Palestine, and they don't. The two-state solution has always been a con. There is no possible two-state solution. The only possible solution is a single state where, exactly as you say, everybody would be equal, completely irrespective. The state should be blind to people's religion and to people's skin color. That's nothing to do with your rights as a citizen. And that's where, of course, it is in Israel today, even within Israel, there are over 300 different laws in Israel discriminating between people on the grounds of whether they are Jewish or whether they are non-Jewish, including laws governing who Arabs living in Israel can marry, for example. And these are laws imposed by the state of Israel on where they can travel, all kinds of apartheid laws. That all has to be swept away. What is needed is a single state where everybody is equal, just as a state should operate.
Yeah, and everyone who wants to stay stays, and everybody who doesn't want to stay can leave. That's what definitely happened in South Africa, but it's not a perfect situation. These things are all in flux. It's a constant state of development, and I think the same would be the case if this was happening in what is now Israel and Palestine. But Craig, you penned a really amazing piece on your website. And again, I want to show this to people. This is where you want to visit Craig Murray's website. His blog is fantastic. You wrote a really incredible piece recently, Craig, about your time in the Foreign Office. And you even shared your experience of having to send out letter back in the days when you had to reply with each inquiry with a letter back to the public, and the pressure that you were under to toe the party line on apartheid during the period. I think this is if I'm not mistaken, the 80s and 90s. But it was an incredible story, and I encourage people to go to Craig Murray's blog. I don't have the headline to hand, Craig, but it's one of the best pieces of many great pieces you've written over the years. But is this same dynamic at play here? Because the unconditional support for Israel is extraordinary, especially in Britain, Germany, the EU, and the United States, Canada, and so forth. Give us a little bit of insight of what type of pressure or groupthink is going on in the halls of power in the West?
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem is that the people in the halls of power never meet anybody who doesn't share their opinion. And they see those who don't share their opinion as deplorable, as Hillary Clinton might put it. These rough, uncouth people out on the streets holding banners who are nothing to do with them, whereas all the elite, smug, wealthy people they meet support Israel. And of course, the politicians are paid to support Israel. But there will be many, many people within the State Department, within the British Foreign Office, and certainly within the militaries. There'll be many people who are deeply unhappy at the direction the people elites the elites are taking us. But it's very difficult. And as I explained in that story, that when I first joined the Foreign Office, my background and my political thinking were, of course, rather suspicious to the security services who vet people joining the Foreign Office. And so I was put on the South Africa desk as a test to see if I could carry out government policy obediently as a civil servant. And so for the first couple of years of my tenure there, I was signing letters out to members of the public, replying to members of the public, saying that Nelson Mandela is a terrorist. He was rightly convicted after a free and fair trial. He's a terrorist. The ANC are terrorists, and Nelson Mandela should be in jail, because that was the policy of the British government. And the point I make in that article, which I think is extremely important, which is that under current anti-terrorist legislation, under which I myself have been arrested, if the legislation enforced today was enforced then, everybody who campaigned to free Nelson Mandela would have been jailed for supporting terrorism. Because under today's legislation, the government decides who's a terrorist. And then if you're seen to support them, you get up to 14 years in jail for supporting terrorism. And the government in the UK, and I believe in the United States, labels Hezbollah and Hamas as terrorist organizations. So if you say anything supportive of them, you can be jailed for up to 14 years. And that's a massive decrease in civil liberty since the 80s, when we used to have anti-apartheid marches, we used to have marches to free Nelson Mandela. It would be illegal now to campaign for the release of somebody the government considers to be a terrorist. And that's only part of the kind of rollback of civil liberties in society, and the way that the neoliberal establishment seeks to enforce groupthink. You're asking about how they arrive at their groupthink. They convince themselves that people are fundamentally wrong and evil if they think anything other than the neoliberal doctrine. It's almost like a cult. It's very difficult, and that cult embraces the political class, and it embraces the senior members of the media, who you can see them whenever confronted by people who don't think like they do, they react with disbelief. They go immediately into cognitive dissonance. There's that rather nice clip at the moment of some of the Code Pink people confronting a CNN reporter, and you can just see she just can't cope with it. Who are these people? These people don't believe in the things I believe in. There must be something deeply wrong with them. And we also saw, of course, elements of that in the election in the United States, where Kamala Harris's people were simply unable to understand why people weren't voting for her. There must be something deeply wrong with people who don't see that there's only one true way, and that's a dangerous way of thinking.
No, I can definitely reiterate what you're talking about there. I'm adjacent to some mainstream media journalists who I know through mutuals or who I cross paths with, as well as people in politics, and they recoil in horror at the very, even if you say something that's nuanced, people get very uncomfortable, and there's a real deep fear that of being tarred with this Hamas sympathizer brush or something like this. And what's extraordinary, Craig, is even if you believe in the proscribed doctrine from the United States, Britain, and Europe that Hamas and Hezbollah are terrorist groups. They're not threatening the West. They're in a civil war or a military standoff with Israel that's recognized as an occupying power by the United Nations and by the ICJ and many other international institutions that we all opted into in the West. So it's amazing that this conversation can't happen freely in mainstream circles. But I want to point to people. Here's the article. Who are the terrorists? And this is an extraordinary. It gives you a really great insight, I think. And this is, we're getting really to the nub of the issue here, Craig. It's almost as if this is all being kind of couched under the rubric of the global war on terror again. And they've just extended it. And here we are. It's covering Israel and it's covering the globe under this framing. And you can't really have an honest conversation about what's really going on, or even a free conversation, without being framed somehow as, giving succor to the enemy, as it were. I mean, the same would go with the Russia conversation too, and I'm sure this would be the same with China if the Taiwan situation became inflamed and the West were involved militarily. But your thoughts on this just general cloak, this framing?
I think that's absolutely right. And you were quite right to mention earlier that Hamas and Hezbollah have never attacked the West, which they haven't. Their enemy is Israel. And interestingly, of course, the people who have attacked the West or Western interests, people like ISIS and al-Nusra and al-Qaeda, were actually all sponsored by Israel and by the West's allies in the Gulf, and indeed by the West themselves. So once you start to go down this rabbit hole, it is very, very deep indeed. Yeah, I was thinking about it this morning, that if you look at Iran, if you look at Russia, and if you look at China, those are three of the greatest traditions of civilization in human history. The accumulated wisdom and the heritage of culture and civilization of Russia. You think of Dostoevsky, you think of Tolstoy, you think of Chekhov. You look at places like St. Petersburg and the incredible architecture. You think all Russia has contributed to world thought, which includes people like Lenin. His contribution to world thought is undeniably profound. You look at countries like Russia, you look at China and its amazing civilization, and the fact that China, there's no world power has ever become as economically dominant as China now is without having territorial ambition. And China doesn't have territorial ambition. It may want to reclaim Taiwan, which is part of China, or it has been part of China, and which even the Taiwanese don't deny is part of China. They just think they should run the whole of China. But you look at China, and it's something incredible civilization, and you realize that many things we think were invented by Europeans were actually invented in China, sometimes thousands of years earlier. And you look at Iran and the extraordinary civilization there. You think of Omar Khayyam and Rumi. You think of the invention of algebra, the invention of modern medicine. All came out of the Iranian civilization. And I'm supposed to wake up in the morning and hate Russian people and Chinese people and Iranian people because my government thinks I should hate them for no other reason. And I can see no argument we are morally better than those countries. We are, at the moment, conducting a genocide, which we are actively supporting and funding and arming. We are surrounding Russia with missiles and nuclear weapons. We are hanging on to colonies in places. And our democratic so-called systems, ended in the United States with Trump against Harris, who cannot conceivably be the two most qualified people to be president in the United States. It's a farce. It's a shadow of democracy. And we ended up with Keir Starmer, who's a deeply authoritarian MI5 plant, who was arrested, who was elected on 32% of the popular vote, 32% of the popular vote, and 18% of those eligible to vote. In the UK, the claims that our democratic systems are perfect and much better than those of these other countries, I don't think stand up either. So the idea, this idea of sides, it's like supporting a football team almost. You have to support the UK and US. Our team is better than the Russian team or the Chinese team or the Iranian team. Well, why? What the hell is better about us than is about them? I think, and this isn't particularly cultural relativism. I'm saying whatever standards you adopt, we are failing those standards just as much as they are. This, of course, is how the First World War started. You get an alliance of blocks of alliances, and then you get fault lines, as in Ukraine and as in the Middle East, and wars which start to escalate out of control, and then eventually something goes too far, and an incident which in the First World War was as trivial as the assassination of a not especially important Austrian archduke, which leads to a series of consequences and leads to I can't remember, 30 million dead in the First World War, something like that. And with what's happening, we have the blocks, we have those alliances. We have Russia, China, Iran, and then we have UK, US, Saudi, Germany. The alliances are in place, the wars are in place. It's just waiting for that stupid trigger that could set it all off. And we're meant to go into this with stupid loyalty to our country, even when our country is behaving abysmally, and then we're all meant to happily die for our country. And personally, I'd rather sit that one out.
And back to the Lebanese conversation, what's happening in Lebanon right now. As we speak, as you said, Craig, the noise cancellation on your phone is blurring out a lot of the noise which you and everybody who is living in that city has to contend with on a daily and hourly and minute-by-minute basis. Drones flying overhead, Israeli drones, jets, F-35s, bombings, and so forth. I've been on spaces on X with journalists in Lebanon, and you can literally hear the booms in the background. I mean, this is something that would be completely unacceptable, totally out of bounds of any sort of civilized existence if this was happening in a European country. But for some strange reason, which many of us are at pains to figure out, it's perfectly acceptable that this happens to the Lebanese, that residential neighborhoods, as you said, Craig, are being pulverized, turned to dust in a matter of seconds. People were going about living their daily, ordinary lives. All of a sudden, absolute horror, abject horror. And we've seen these scenes in Gaza and in Palestine so much over the last year, but I don't think people in the West are can quite comprehend what that's like in a very, very westernized city like Beirut. It's just a modern metropolis, and people have lives there. It's very densely populated. To allow a country to have full carte blanche to bomb a city like Beirut is, to me, unbelievable. I honestly can't believe it's being allowed to stand this long. But I know we're treading over obvious ground here, Craig. But go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in you saying if it happened in a European city, people would be outraged, because Beirut feels like a European city. It's of all the Middle Eastern cities, it is perhaps the most European influenced, and the Lebanese people come from a society and culture which is extremely similar to our own society and culture. There's nothing alien feeling about them at all. Of course, that shouldn't affect our perception of of them as people, or their right not to be bombed and killed. Even people from very different cultures have the right to their culture, the right to live, the right to not be bombed and killed. But it's happening here in a society to which we can directly relate, because it's just like ours. And there hasn't been a moment of our conversation when I haven't had very loud noise of drones and jets overhead at this end. And of course, there is an element of fear, which you see mostly in the children, of course. People in Lebanon are used to conflict, and most people are going about their daily lives as though nothing were happening. But no one has any idea, when a bomb could fall on them. And the definition is extraordinary. There's a great deal of resilience here. One thing, for example, is that because of the continual waves of destruction in Lebanon, there's really not much by way of an electricity grid. So electric power is anyway decentralized and produced largely by generators rather than by a central grid. And when one generator system goes down, they tend to be district generator systems or street generator systems. And when one goes down, which it does frequently, it switches to another. So because of this kind of distributed services aspect to Lebanon, it's quite difficult for Israel to destroy the civilian infrastructure. So life goes on here to a greater degree than you might expect. We're on telephone 4G internet at the moment, and mostly that's managed to stay up and running. It creaks a bit, but it's mostly stayed up and running. And this is a city which has absorbed 700,000 refugees. The city has increased in size by about a third. Over a quarter of the Lebanese population are displaced by this war. Over a quarter of the population are displaced by this war. And the ability of the Lebanese to cope with that, to find places for people to sleep, to keep feeding their people, is actually extremely impressive. And of course, there are exceptions and people complain, but in general, you have to admire the way the people of Lebanon cope and carry on.
No, they are some of the most resilient people that you'll ever meet, and they're in many ways born that way. It's not a choice that they've had to make. It's something that has just been kind of imposed and foisted upon their society, and they're amazing in that respect. But what you said before, Craig, earlier on in this conversation, I think is really important, and maybe it's a good point to kind of explore as we conclude this broadcast. And again, thank you very much for joining us, Craig. We're live on X, YouTube, Rumble, Facebook Live as well, on the video streams as well as on the audio streams, everybody. And I appreciate you guys for joining us on this week's Sunday Wire. But Craig, you said, and I agree with you, and I think many people are starting to see this, that there is an effort, external effort, mainly by the United States in Lebanon, to set people against each other. This is definitely what Israel wants. They want to see a return to the civil war. It's almost as if, and I'll bring this article up on screen from The Cradle, which is a Lebanese-based media outlet, which I think in the English language is probably one of the best Middle East, if not the best at the moment in the world, The Cradle. And their editor, Sharmeen Narwani, is amazing. All of their writers are fantastic. Lebanon blackmailed by U.S.-Israeli ceasefire proposal, accept or we escalate, is the inference here coming from the United States delegation. And one can only conclude, Craig, that you're reading the words of Benjamin Netanyahu in these words coming out of the United States. And this issue of sovereignty, this situation has laid this whole thing totally bare. So people have always talked about this over the years, of the incredible U.S. Influence and controlling the levers of politics and the military and everything in Lebanon. this situation has really, really laid it bare. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I think a lot of people are beginning to see this now, that the United States doesn't necessarily have the well-being and good, welfare of the Lebanese population at heart. That's what I'm seeing. This is what many people are starting to realize now. Craig, how can you explain this level of divisiveness coming from Washington regarding Lebanon? Go ahead.
No, there's no doubt that that threatened escalation is happening. The last couple of days, the bombing has been ratcheting up and ratcheting up and ratcheting up, and it's being done deliberately by the Israelis and Americans, because the Americans are arriving here to push their ceasefire proposal on Wednesday, and that is a shameful proposal. That proposal says that Hezbollah must withdraw north of the Litani River, and that the Israelis may enter southern Lebanon anytime they wish in order to enforce the agreement, and may freely overfly Lebanon with military aircraft anytime they wish. And I really think the Americans have pushed this too far. Trying to force the Lebanese to sign that on the basis of a bombing campaign. I don't believe, my reading is that Lebanese politicians here are not prepared to accept that degree of humiliation. And ultimately, of course, you have to get Hezbollah to accept it, because they're the ones doing the fighting, and they're the ones who would have to withdraw. But people are seeing it clearly for what it is, for American control. Of course, a lot of that control is exerted through the military, and by providing a certain amount of hardware, by providing a certain amount of cash, money, both finance for the military and perhaps CIA money into people's pockets, and providing a certain amount of prestige in terms of training, in terms of visits to Washington and that kind of thing, rather like Pakistan, where the United States controls Pakistan through the military. That's a key mode of influence for the Americans here, and perhaps their major mode of influence is through control of the military. The extraordinary thing, of course, is that it wouldn't take too much for the Chinese or the Russians to come in and outbid the United States in that kind of war. If you're basing your influence in the country on your ability to bribe generals with goodies or cash, you have to be very confident you're wealthier than anyone else and have more interest in doing it than anyone else, if you're going to get it, in case that becomes a competition. So we will see. We've also, of course, seen for the first time, we've seen Russia show signs of getting involved here in ceasefire proposals and in the discussion. And I think the Lebanese are starting to look. But there are senior people in important positions in the Lebanese government who are starting to think of turning towards Russia and China, because the Americans have overplayed their hand. And I think that's perhaps a key word. I think the Americans really are overplaying their hand, and by trying to terrify Lebanon into compliance and into effectively giving up sovereign control of southern Lebanon. I don't think that's going to run. I really don't.
And for me personally, it's Lebanon and its people, its history, its culture. I've spent a lot of time there over the years, and it's a place very near and dear to my heart and my family's heart as well. And I've visited Tyre and walked Tyre by foot. Spent days walking in Tyre, Baalbek, and other historic sites around the country. The history there, Craig, it's so multi-layered and so deep. And to see bombs being dropped on some of these communities in these ancient cities that are beyond World Heritage sites, I mean, it is part of our collective story as humanity. And to see the carelessness, not unlike what the United States did to a lot of Iraq. Let's put that on the board as well, Craig. But it really it penetrates very deeply to see those scenes, and I just can't understand why there's not more international condemnation about that, because it is our human heritage that's being wiped out and destroyed, as well as the lives of people in Lebanon. But your final thoughts on this, and I'll give you the floor for as long as you want. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah. No, it's incredible to be here and to see what's being done, and to be able to say, I can say to you with certainty that what's being targeted is purely civilian areas and civilian infrastructure and people's homes. And often the Israelis are, let's be honest about it, in the majority of the bombs falling on Beirut. Not all, but the majority of bombs falling on Beirut. The Israelis are issuing evacuation orders on the districts being evacuated, and the Israelis are then destroying all the housing in that district. That limits the immediate number of people killed. They also are doing, there was one yesterday, attacks on blocks of apartment where they don't give any warning and just everyone in the apartment block is killed. But why? Why are you devastating civilian housing on a large scale? Why are you devastating the things that sustain life? Why are you devastating medical services? Why are you killing doctors? And the answer is, of course, that the only possible answer is that's part of a pattern of genocide. That's why you would do that. There's no real military objective in destroying block after block after block of flats, other than to destroy a civilian population. And it amazes me that the world is pretending it's not happening. And as I say, there's nothing stopping the world from coming. I flew here. The BBC and CNN could get on a plane and be here tomorrow and could be seeing what's actually being destroyed, as opposed to the false Israeli claims about what's being destroyed, and could be reporting it, but they choose not to do so. And the world's politicians choose not to come to the aid of Lebanon. And even, we had the Arab forums in Saudi Arabia talking away. Even the Arab states are doing nothing to really help and assist Lebanon, which is why I'm here. I thought that, it's not a great deal I can do as an individual, but I will do what I can do. Which has come here and report and try to get the truth out there. And it's actually a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to be here with the Lebanese people as they go through this. And I'm very much looking forward over the next few weeks to being able to get out more of the truth and be able to travel more and then bring to you the individual stories of people who are being affected. Because what is happening is evil. And it must be. Why is Israel spreading its devastation of civilian areas? Baalbek, people should understand, is north of Beirut. People seem to think this is only happening in southern Lebanon. It's not. It's happening in areas where no missiles are being launched, and which are not near Israel, purely because they are centers of Shia population. And another thought I want to give you as well is one which I think is very important, and that's Dahir, for example, which is being bombed to oblivion here, is a lovely suburb. I was in Dahir briefly, and it's like being in one of the better areas of Marseille. It's a very nice suburb with a good standard middle-class housing, with Western-style shops and cafes and restaurants. It has cultural life, a cafe culture. It has arts. And if you go, you were saying you've been to Tyre, which is a Hezbollah-run area. It has beaches. You can go on the beach in your bikini and you can drink alcohol on the beach, even though it's run by Hezbollah. And Christian churches are protected by Hezbollah. So much of what you're told in the West about the society here simply untrue. The idea that these are some kind of extremist cult areas under heavy theocratic control where there's no freedom of religion or freedom of personal behavior is completely untrue. That just isn't how it is. That's not what is being destroyed. What is being destroyed here is a beautiful community and a beautiful civilization, and as you say, the remnants of some of earliest human history and some of the greatest relics of human history, all under bombardment, and it is a complete and total disgrace.
Craig Murray, I appreciate you giving your time to us, and we overcame some of the technical difficulties, which if you've ever been to Beirut, you know that internet access and signals and things like that is a whole world of its own that you need to navigate, but we managed to do it, and I really appreciate that, Craig. And again, I want to point people to Craig Murray's website as well. And Craig, as you did with campaigning for Julian Assange, leading the way journalistically, I would say, in terms of covering all of the legal proceedings and the trials and tribulations, you're doing the same, and hopefully you'll do more with regards to what's happening in the Middle East. And we're so happy that you're there and you're reporting from there, because we know we're going to get something of a very high quality. And if you want to support Craig's work, this is the epitome of independent journalism, ladies and gentlemen. Just go to craigmurray.org. Lots of options there of how you can support Craig and his work. And Craig, if you want to give a shout out on that front to, what are the best ways that people can help you out in your endeavors?
Yeah, that's very kind. It's expensive being here, frankly. We've had to hire this place to stay. We need drivers, interpreters, producers to help set us up with stuff. It's cost, five-figure sum that I'm here with Neil Sladderfoyd, well-known cinematographer from WikiLeaks, and it's cost us, a tidy five-figure sum to set up here, and we have no means of raising that except from people like you. I would say my website, it's important, is craigmurray.org.uk. The .uk is important. If you just go to craigmurray.org, then a right-wing site has been set up to confuse you on purpose. You need the UK on the end. craigmurray.org.uk, and you can subscribe on my site. Is free to read for everyone. It is free to read. You don't need to subscribe. And it's also free for anybody to copy and republish, including in translation. It's information I want the world to have. But if you can subscribe and support me, I'll be very happy. There's a PayPal button there. We've also just added, through the website, we've also just added Patreon as another means of paying for those who boycott PayPal. And we've started a GoFundMe crowdfunder that you can find the link to on the website as well. But we really do need, I'm sorry to say this, but it's always true of independent media. We really do need cash, because operating here is expensive, and we have no income at all. I have no corporate sponsorship. I have no state sponsorship. I have no foundation or fund that backs me. This is just us here. And anything you can give to help would be extremely appreciated.
Yeah, and we'll be sharing those links as well below on our Twitter feeds, as well as on social media. And I think you're hopefully going to get a lot of support, Craig. And I think your work is definitely going to be something a lot of us are going to be looking forward to in the coming weeks and months, however long you decide to spend in country in the Levant. Much appreciated. Thank you again, Craig, for your time. It's been fantastic. I hope we can connect again as things develop, but best of luck, and to you and your colleagues as well. Stay safe, and again, take care, Craig. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Patrick.
And there he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Craig Murray. He is doing fantastic work, and you do want to be supporting the work that he's doing on the ground there. There's a lot of different options. Again, we'll put the website up on screen. That is craigmurray.org.uk. This is what the website looks like. This is the authentic article here, and lots of different ways you can support independent journalism. This is great independent journalism. So you definitely want to be backing that. We have a shorter than usual episode today, no overdrive segment. So we're going to be leaving you for now. But again, thank you for joining us on the Sunday Wire. This has been a fantastic episode, an unbelievable conversation with Craig Murray, and one that I think is definitely going to be on our highlight reel in the coming months. So thank you so much, you guys, for joining us here on the Sunday Wire. Again, I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're going to go out here with Joseph Arthur. So after the outro here, stick around. We're going to premiere a new track by Joseph Arthur, which I don't think anybody's heard yet. He's done his own video as well, and it's very poignant to the discussion that we're having as well. He's a conscious artist, so we're amazing that we can showcase his work as well as other independent artists on this program. But that's all we got time for, folks. So take care. All the best.